Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice, a publishing division of the Association of College and Research Libraries. In this series, we're taking a closer look at academic library consortia, organizations that many of you work with every day, but that are evolving in ways that are worth unpacking. While consortia have long been associated with collective purchasing power, the role today extends well beyond negotiating content deals. We'll explore how consortia are increasingly supporting shared infrastructure that helps libraries operate more efficiently and strategically. We'll also look at how affordability remains a central priority in advancing broader institutional goals around student success and equitable access. And importantly, we'll also dig into how consortia are helping libraries measure and demonstrate impact. Joining me on the program are Terry Galloway, Executive Director at the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium, Jill Morris, Executive Director at the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation, Jenya O'Gara, Director at the Virtual Library of Virginia, and Amy Pawlowski, Executive Director at OhioLink. In the second episode of our series, we discuss why and how academic library consortia are more than just content buyers. I want to talk a little bit about going beyond the idea of consortia being just content buyers and more into some of the other services. Jenya, how do consortia provide infrastructure for members? And how do these frameworks allow members to scale up? And I think, as Jill mentioned, start building capacity.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me think if I can answer it without being too garbled. I think that you build infrastructure in a variety of ways. So I think one of the things that we have looked at are, I noted we started an open and affordable program in 2018 and 2019.
Mhm.
And what we could see throughout the state was that there was not enough time and support at the individual institution level to really jumpstart an open education program for the state where faculty had leave and time and space and support to create these materials to make sure that their students could have a free and open resource available to them for their course content. So we see this need, we take it up amongst our membership, bubbles up from our membership, we take it to the state, and then we develop a grant program where we're actually distributing funds out across the state to facilitate the development of these resources, specifically in multi-institutional collaboration so that we can kind of maximize the benefit across our schools. We run that for a couple of years, and then we see, turns out that librarians aren't publishers, and also maybe our faculty aren't publishers, and we might need some additional support here. And so what we do then is we start a publishing support program to make sure that in addition to distributing awards, we're now able to provide publishing support, which maybe our big research schools can do for some of their members, but our smaller institutions certainly can't do. And so that when we're giving these awards, we're also making sure that we have publishing support so that the OER that are created at the end of these awards are high quality, they're accessible, the graphic design is on point, and that they have been peer reviewed. And that also moves them through production faster. And so we do that at the state level instead of the individual level. And so that's a way that we can develop infrastructure in a way that is way beyond kind of, I think, what you typically think about as kind of licensing. But like, this is a need within the community, and here's where we see that the need is the greatest. And how do we scale it up based on real data? Like, what are we seeing? Run it for a couple of years. What do they need now? And then add to it so that it is the program that the state needs in that moment. And the whole time, we do a lot of, I would say data informed work. We do a lot of surveying. We do a lot of kind of testing to make sure that the programs that we're running are doing what we want them to do. Again, coming back to that core kind of like, what is our purpose, and does this program do that? Because if it doesn't, then like Terry, we will sunset it
Right.
because there's just a few of us. So that would be
Exactly.
my how do we develop infrastructure.
Yeah. So speaking of Terry, would Skelk's Folio project kind of fall into this category of sort of infrastructure development?
Absolutely. And a
Okay.
lot of parallels with what Jen already mentioned, this idea of having the qualified staff and really being able to provide this fractional piece of qualified staff, where libraries may only have two or three personnel. They can't just go out and hire a new systems developer to launch open source software. So for us, Folio has required some backfilling in some areas, with communications, with project governance, and then shifting from just being a licensing organization into technology support. We had to build in ticketing software and really transform into this group that's doing service level agreements, for example. But we can do that at the consortium in order to have that fractional support for the membership that want to participate in an open source software project like Folio. We've also had great support from EBSCO, who is acting as our technical implementation and host of the project, and offering training services and allowing us to really develop this cohort model. So we're not one of the consortia that has had a long time ILS or integrated library system. So
Hmm.
this is a huge culture shift where we have all of these libraries departing different systems and coming into a new unified model to have technology support. It's a
Wow.
big lift. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like it. And then Jill, Palsy's Easy Borrow service and the Haiku repository, is that also kind of slotting into this category of infrastructure?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, pretty much from the very beginning of PALSI as a consortium, resource sharing was really central to what we were there to do. And to facilitate that sharing, we needed some method for really bringing efficiencies to our work. And Easy Borrow is a great example of that. We are powered by an open source resource sharing platform called Project Reshare, which we were a part of actually building together with a variety of other consortia, which was very exciting, daunting a little bit, but it was a project that we undertook because we really wanted to see our values reflected in the tools and software that we were using to power so much of our sort of core reason for being. And so we saw the community, the resource sharing community, that open source software space as a really great place for us to influence, to bring our collective resources and to make sure that we could power those tools in ways that we wanted to. And then in addition to that, really develop community within our consortium. And this was something I was going to mention. In addition to the technical tools and infrastructure, we really like to think about the infrastructure of our people,
Mm.
the social infrastructures that are needed to support conversations in order to build effective tools and services. And I would say that's just as important as any technology or tool, if not more so. And we do the same thing in the Haiku repository space. Huge shout out to my colleagues who are not here today with us, the Palni Consortium in Indiana. We're partnered up with another consortium in order to be able to build out a set of consortially scaled repository tools and services through the Samvera community. The platform is called Haiku. And we are able to do that together in partnership by sharing our expertise and then building a community of users around that service so that they're supporting each other too. So I think that's another really important aspect of shared infrastructure is the people, and providing the tools and services that let them come together, share their knowledge, and really help each other out. And that's something they really enjoy. They love getting together in our meetings, especially when we're in person. You see those connections being made, and I think that's just a really important part of the infrastructure that consortia provide, are those relationships.
Yeah. Excellent point. Thank you, Jill. And then Amy, the shared catalog that you guys rolled out last summer. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I dive into that, I think that this line of questions really drives at the if you know one consortium, you know one consortium in the best way possible, right?
Mm.
Each of my colleagues have been talking about making sure that they're fulfilling the needs of their members in the best way possible. And that might be different for one organization to the next. It's different based on where their funding is coming from and how their users can participate and the skill set that they have within their organization. So I think it's really cool talking about how we're the same but very different, but all doing really well with our members and really meeting their needs. I have such high respect for my colleagues here in the call today. So anyways, Ohio Link. Yes, we migrated to a new system back in June, and it was interesting. Ohio Link built the very first shared catalog system with a vendor. Went through the RFI process and built this whole tool, like I mentioned, back in the early mid 90s. And we were using that same tool up until June of this past year. And it was time for us to kind of rethink how we were working together. And pluses and minuses with being on a system that long. Everyone was very comfortable with that system, but at the same time, there were lots of things that we knew we couldn't do that we could probably do better with a system that was more tightly integrated. So that's exactly where we moved this past June. And it has been fantastic. Talk about building an infrastructure, but building a community on top of an infrastructure is what really has been eye-opening and so wonderful for me to experience at Ohio Link. And I'm watching our members help each other and work through this new system in the best way. I have the Ohio State University talking to somebody at Muskingum College about how they're setting up their system and what's the best way to do this, and Ohio Link helping each of them navigate those relationships so we can point each other, well, wait, I think somebody over here was trying to do something similar. Why don't you go ahead and give them a call? And then bringing everybody together on joint calls for how we can all work through this has been pretty fantastic.
That's excellent. Amy, do you feel, and or Jill, like the sort of the community development that's kind of sprung up out of these efforts, is that, do you think that has momentum to kind of carry into the longer term? Like, are people members building long-term relationships as they work on these projects together?
Yeah, I think this is really important because I think if you're not working on this, and I'm positive my colleagues will all say the same thing, if you are not, as executive director, thinking about or working on this every day, you're missing something, because there really is such a big value in being able to collaborate in the best sense that you can and move the organization forward. So where you're asking about, does it have potential? I think it has to be. It's a core service. It's something that we have to do to be successful.
Okay.
We're
Excellent.
all nodding. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think trust is the core infrastructure, right? That's how everything else gets done. And it's just so essential that we have those relationships in place that Amy was mentioning. I think that is what ultimately makes everything work the way that it can. And so building that over time through, all sorts of different mechanisms. We each have different ways of communicating with our members and providing, and facilitating spaces for them to talk to each other. That's a really core part. It's baked into everything that we do. And we have to continuously earn that trust throughout, all of our, everything that we do, through transparency and really having those conversations directly with our members and showing them that we're listening. Because ultimately our power is their power. We're just here to really amplify what they each do. And so many of the ideas that surface are their ideas. We're not, dreaming them up out of thin air. They're bringing them to us and giving us opportunities to take them and start to run with them. So I think that trust is the foundational infrastructure we really have.
We ask a lot of questions and we listen a lot. So.
Yep.
I would also say I couldn't agree more with what everybody has said. The people in the consortium are the consortium. They make the consortium. Beyond that, in our consortium, the people are also doing the work. I mean, they do the heavy lift on these committees. Like, we don't decide what's going to happen for collection development throughout the state. We have really smart, really engaged professionals from across the state making recommendations and tough choices and leaning on each other to decide what they're going to do as a state, not just as an institution. And I am constantly impressed by seeing my colleagues kind of take off their institutional hat and then be like, what are we going to do as a state to take care of our students and our researchers? It's one of the most fulfilling parts about getting to work in a consortium is seeing that kind of partnership and the kind of trust that our members have in one another when they're kind of embarking on these big initiatives.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, like, let's look at sort of policy angle here. Consortia are also well positioned to act as strategic intermediaries and introduce new policies across many institutions. Jill, can we start with policy's focus on accessibility efforts or its announcement with the Authors Alliance, for example? Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And, having just come back from the ICOLC meeting that we were referencing, we had a lot of conversations about where consortia are positioned to support conversations around policy, shared policy, and really engagement and advocacy around different types of work. I'll maybe start with the Authors Alliance partnership that we've just developed because a lot of our accessibility work is actually based on what Jenya and the Viva Consortium have done. So I want to give her a chance to talk about that. But
Cool.
With the Authors Alliance, this was an area where we had identified really rapidly changing and evolving policy related to scholarly communications in a place where, we have 4.5 full-time employees at PALCI. We don't have a huge staff. We're small but mighty. And even with that really wonderful team, we just don't have enough capacity to hire additional expertise at the moment. So as we're trying to monitor policy changes that are happening across our space, we're looking at ways where we can partner together to share some of that expertise that not all of us, the consortium doesn't have centrally, and that not all of my member institutions have at their own institutions. So whenever that happens, rather than trying to, constantly grow, I think what we're really trying to do is be strategic about who we partner with. And we saw an opportunity to join with the Authors Alliance at a consortium level in order to bring some additional expertise, especially around shifting information policy landscape into the PALCI consortium, and to begin to host and facilitate community of really a community of interest and practice around some of those changes. And we talk about all sorts of different things. I mean, all of the changes that are happening with AI, how we go about licensing those resources, how we can better support authors in our libraries, keeping an eye on, the legal landscape and everything that's happening there, and trying to stay up to date with that. So by partnering with the Authors Alliance, we've been able to bring their expertise into the PALCI consortium. We leveraged sort of a collective financial commitment across our members in order to be able to do that. And what it looks like now is we have these monthly calls with experts who can answer questions, open office hours style. We have webinars and expertise coming in that way through professional development. And then in addition to that, we have opportunities to talk about what do we want to collectively do together. Are there specific best practices that we want to apply, much like what we do in the resource sharing space? Or are there other ways that we might collaborate to try and influence what's happening in the industry? So step one, really building that awareness across our institutions by bringing in that expertise so that our members can all benefit from it. That levels the playing field a little bit, and it also allows our organizations that have more of that expertise to bring that to bear on everybody else. So we're excited about the way that can scale and support our members in some new ways. Those are new types of partnerships for us. The Authors Alliance had never partnered with a consortium before, and we're eager to see how this model works, to continue to refine it, and hopefully others will find it useful as well.
Great. Zhenya, did you want to talk about the accessibility initiatives you're working on?
So it's a scary time to talk about accessibility. I know with April 2026 coming up for everybody. I do want to, before I talk about accessibility, I do want to say that we all copy prolifically from each other. I am so excited about what's happening with the Authors Alliance and Policy, and I've already contacted them and been like, what would it look like in this instance? And then some of the stuff that Terry and Amy are doing are just the data member analysis impact stuff that Skelk is working on, I think is fascinating. So we're all just constantly working together and trying to figure out what's next. We don't have a silver bullet for accessibility, but one of the things that we as a consortium decided to kind of approach was what can we do to deduplicate effort both across the state of Virginia, but then also with our consortial colleagues kind of across the country. What can we do kind of at a baseline? And we've done a couple of things. The primary one is probably the development of an accessibility roadmap for the consortium that talks about where we are and where we want to go. And that has to do with everything from our website to our publishing platforms to what we're doing with our shared collections. Our shared collections is probably the easiest one to talk about, in that we're doing kind of individual reviews of anything that the Library Accessibility Alliance consortium a consortium that's not here today, building off of their work and trying to add to that work in resources that haven't yet been reviewed, and then sharing those out with our consortium so that they don't each individually have to take up how do we make sure all of our resources are ready to go in April 2026 when the new Title II guidelines come into effect. I do want to add, although I said it was a hard thing to talk about right now, we're excited about the accessibility guidelines. We think it is so critical to make our resources accessible to the work that we do, to all of our missions. And so even though I know that it is overwhelming to many of our member libraries and consortia across the country, we're also excited to have the opportunity to really move accessibility forward in a way that I don't think that we've been able to in the last 5 years. So we're really trying to look at it as an opportunity.
You just heard from Terry Galloway, Executive Director at the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium, Jill Morris, Executive Director at the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation, Jenya O'Gara, Director at the Virtual Library of Virginia, and Amy Pawlowski, Executive Director at OhioLink. Join us next week when we look at examples of how consortia are helping libraries support affordability and student success. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by Choice and produced and edited by digital media producer Sabrina Kofer. Underwriting opportunities are directed by Melissa Carr and Ryan King. And for more information about underwriting opportunities, download the Choice Media Kit at choice360.org. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.